The wind came down from the Rockies like a living thing, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of pine, snow, and secrets older than any map. In 1885, the American West still breathed danger and promise in equal measure, and the mountains kept their truths well hidden. Before this story pulls you deep into that wild world of dust and moonlight, remember this. If you love powerful stories of love, sacrifice, and shocking revelations, subscribe to our channel, share this story with your friends, and keep the fire of great storytelling alive. Now listen closely, because some love stories are born not in comfort, but in hardship, and some men who appear poor are richer than kings in ways no one expects. Clara Whitmore had not imagined her life would end up here, standing beside a narrow mountain trail with a single trunk, a borrowed horse, and a husband most people pitied. Only 3 weeks earlier, she had still been a schoolteacher in St. Louis, wearing pressed dresses and listening to her mother sigh about suitable matches. Now her boots were dust-stained, her fingers raw from travel, and her future tied to a man the town called that poor mountain fellow. Elias Cole stood a few paces ahead of her, tall and broad-shouldered, his back straight as a pine. His coat was worn but clean, mended carefully at the seams. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, tied at the nape with a strip of leather. He had spoken little since they left the last settlement behind, but when he did, his voice was calm, deep, and steady, like the mountains themselves. The people who whispered about him had said he was a trapper, a nobody, a man with nothing but a shack and a stubborn will. They had warned Clara with raised brows and pitying smiles. "You'll freeze up there," one woman had said, "or starve, or regret it by spring." Clara had only nodded, her heart hammering, because she had already made her choice. She had married Elias not for wealth, not for comfort, but for something she could not name. Something she had seen in his eyes the first time he came into the schoolhouse asking for books to donate to mountain children. There had been intelligence there, and restraint, and a quiet kindness that did not beg to be noticed. When he spoke of the mountains, his words carried respect, not conquest. Now, as the trail narrowed and the world fell away into endless forest and stone, Clara felt the weight of that choice settle fully on her shoulders. "You all right?" Elias asked, finally turning to her. She nodded, lifting her chin. "I am." He studied her face for a moment, as if memorizing it against the long winters ahead, then gave a small nod and continued forward. He did not offer his arm, did not crowd her, and somehow that made her trust him more. They traveled for hours, the path twisting upward, the air thinning, the sun slipping behind jagged peaks. Clara's muscles burned, but she refused to complain. Every so often Elias slowed without a word, matching his pace to hers, as if he could sense her fatigue, without her admitting it. When dusk finally bled into night, Clara saw it, a cabin nestled against the mountainside, smoke curling from the chimney, light glowing warmly through the small windows. It was larger than she had expected, built solidly of dark logs, with a wide porch and stacks of firewood neatly arranged along the wall. "This is better than I imagined," she said softly. Elias glanced at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. "It's enough." Inside, the cabin was warm and clean. A heavy table stood near the hearth, carved with simple but skilled lines. Shelves held books, more books than Clara had ever seen outside a town library, along with jars of herbs, tools polished with care, and a rifle mounted above the mantel that looked far too fine for a poor trapper. Clara noticed these things but said nothing. She had learned that Elias was a man who revealed himself slowly, like a mountain trail that only showed its beauty to those patient enough to walk it. That first winter came hard and fast. Snow buried the world, cutting them off from everything but each other. Clara learned to bake bread with rough flour, to mend clothes by firelight, to read Elias's silences like a language. He taught her how to snowshoe, how to listen for the warning crack of shifting ice, how to tell when a storm would turn deadly. At night they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Elias read aloud from books, in languages Clara barely recognized, French, Latin, even Greek. When she asked where he had learned them, he only smiled faintly. "From a life before," he said, The town's whispers echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. Whatever Elias had been, this was the man he chose to be now. Spring came late, and when it did, it brought strangers. One afternoon Clara saw riders approaching the cabin, 3 men on fine horses, dressed far too well for these mountains. Elias stiffened the moment he saw them. "Stay inside," he told her quietly. She did not argue, but she watched through the window as Elias stepped onto the porch, his posture changing, his presence suddenly commanding. The men dismounted, removing their hats with a respect Clara had never seen anyone show her husband before. "Mr. Cole," one of them said. "We finally found you." Elias's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come." "We had no choice," the man replied. "It's time." Clara's heart pounded. When Elias returned inside, his face was pale but resolute. "It seems," he said carefully, "that there are things I should have told you." Before Clara could respond, the world she knew cracked open, and the truth began to rise like a hidden mansion from the depths of the mountain. By the time summer settled over the high country, Clara Whitmore Cole was no longer the same woman who had arrived with a single trunk and a hopeful heart. Knowledge changes a person, and what she had learned in those weeks after the riders came had reshaped her understanding of love, sacrifice, and the man she had married. Elias had not lied to her, not truly. He had simply withheld a truth so large it might have crushed her if revealed too soon. He had led her one morning along a trail she had never seen, concealed behind a waterfall that roared like thunder. Behind the curtain of water lay a stone passage, wide enough for horses, descending into the mountain itself. Clara's breath had caught in her throat as they emerged into a hidden valley, sunlight spilling over manicured grounds, fountains, and a mansion carved partly from the living rock. It was magnificent. Columns of pale stone, wide terraces, stained glass windows that caught the sun like jewels. It looked like something stolen from a European estate and hidden where no lawman or outlaw could find it. "This," Elias had said quietly, "is my inheritance." He told her then of his birth name, his father's fortune built on railroads and mining, and the enemies that fortune had attracted. He spoke of betrayal, of a brother who had tried to have him killed, of a choice to disappear into the mountains rather than become a pawn in ruthless games of power. "I lived as a poor man," he said, "because it was the only way to live free." Clara had walked through the mansion in silence, her hand brushing marble railings, her mind reeling. Servants emerged from hidden quarters, bowing their heads to Elias with unmistakable loyalty. They looked at Clara with curiosity and respect. That night, Clara stood on a balcony overlooking the valley, the stars blazing above her. Elias joined her, his expression uncertain in a way she had never seen before. "You can leave," he said. "Take whatever you wish. I will understand." She turned to him, seeing not a rich man, not a mountain hermit, but the same man who had slowed his pace to match hers on a narrow trail. "I married you," she said, "not your poverty and not your wealth." The danger did not vanish with the truth. Elias's enemies were persistent, and word of his survival had begun to spread. Armed men tested the valley's defenses. Letters arrived with veiled threats. Clara learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand firm despite it. She proved herself again and again, organizing the household, earning the loyalty of the staff, even standing beside Elias during tense negotiations with men who underestimated her because she was a woman. Her calm intelligence unsettled them far more than shouting ever could. One night, as a storm lashed the valley, Elias confessed his deepest fear. "I thought loving you would be selfish," he said, "that I would only bring danger to your door." Clara took his hands, rough and warm, the hands of a man who had lived many lives. "You brought me truth," she replied, "and purpose. I would choose this again." The final confrontation came not with gunfire, but with exposure. Elias used his knowledge, his records, and his allies to dismantle his brother's power piece by piece. When the man finally arrived at the hidden man's, Ion, expecting to claim it, he found himself stripped of influence, facing justice he could not escape. When it was over, the valley seemed to breathe easier, as if the mountain itself approved. Years later, travelers would speak in hushed tones of a grand estate hidden beyond a waterfall, ruled by a man who had once lived as a poor mountain trapper and the woman who chose him when he had nothing. They said the doors were sometimes open to those in need, that knowledge and kindness flowed from that place like a spring. And they said the love story that began on a dusty trail in 1885 was stronger than gold, deeper than stone, and truer than any rumor whispered by small-town tongues. The night after Elias revealed the hidden valley, Clara did not sleep. She lay beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, watching moonlight spill across the stone walls of the mansion chamber that still felt unreal beneath her fingertips. Everything smelled different here: polished wood, cold marble, old paper, and something deeper, older, like history sealed into the mountain itself. The silence was not empty the way the cabin silence had been. It was layered, guarded, alive. She had thought the shock would come as anger, that she would feel betrayed. Instead, what filled her chest was a quiet, trembling awe and fear, not of Elias but of the world that had been hiding him. When dawn came, it came gently. Sunlight filtered through stained glass and painted the floor in soft blues and golds. Clara rose before Elias and dressed slowly, grounding herself in the simple rituals she knew, lacing her boots, smoothing her hair, steadying her breath. Wealth or wilderness, she reminded herself, a day still began one step at a time. She wandered the corridors alone. The mansion was not ostentatious in the way she had imagined rich men's homes to be. There were no gaudy display eyes, no meaningless excess. Every room had purpose. Maps lined the walls of a study, rail lines, mountain passes, mining claims marked in careful ink. A library stretched longer than the schoolhouse she once taught in, its shelves worn by use, not decoration. Portraits hung in shadowed halls, men and women with intelligent eyes and stern mouths, their gazes following her as if weighing her worth. In one smaller room, she found children's toys. They were old, hand-carved animals, a wooden train, a doll with faded cloth hair. Clara's throat tightened. Elias had been a child here once. Not born poor, not born free, born into expectation, danger, and control. A soft sound behind her made her turn. A woman stood in the doorway, silver-haired, straight-backed, dressed plainly but with unmistakable authority. "You must be Mrs. Cole," the woman said. "I am," Clara replied, meeting her gaze. The woman inclined her head. "I am Margaret Hale. I have managed this household since before your husband could walk." There was no challenge in her tone, but there was assessment. Clara felt it and did not flinch. "I hope to learn from you," Clara said. "If you are willing." Something softened in Margaret's eyes. That, she said, was the correct answer. The days that followed tested Clara in ways the mountain cabin never had. Servants watched her carefully, not unkindly but with curiosity. Visitors arrived. Lawyers, businessmen, men with sharp eyes and smoother smiles than any she trusted. They spoke to Elias in coded language, half-truths and pauses heavy with implication, and they watched her. At first, Clara stayed quiet, listening, absorbing. She learned quickly that silence, when chosen, could be more powerful than speech. She noticed how Elias positioned himself subtly between her and certain men, how his hand would rest lightly at her back, grounding her without confidence. Her. Then came the first threat. It arrived not as violence, but as politeness. A man named Victor Langley visited under the pretense of offering condolences for Elias's long absence. He spoke smoothly, praised the estate, complimented Clara's composure. "You must find all this overwhelming," Langley said as they walked the terrace. Elias momentarily called away. "A mountain man's wife, thrust into privilege." Clara smiled faintly. "I find people more overwhelming than places." Langley chuckled, but his eyes sharpened. "You should encourage your husband to be reasonable. The world he stepped away from has teeth." "So do mountains," Clara replied calmly, "and men who survive them." Langley left that evening. 2 days later, one of the outer watch posts was tested by armed riders. Elias did not panic. He had prepared for this for years. What surprised everyone, including himself, was Clara. She did not retreat into fear. She asked questions. She learned the names of guards, memorized escape routes, studied ledgers Elias showed her late at night. She understood patterns, motives, leverage. When Elias worried aloud about supply lines, she suggested alternative routes through passes she had learned while living in the cabin. "You think like a strategist," he said one evening, looking at her with something close to wonder. "I think like a teacher," she replied, "and a wife." The valley came under pressure. Rumors spread. Elias's enemies moved not with guns first, but with laws. False claims, forged documents, accusations meant to draw him into courtrooms, where influence mattered more than truth. Clara read every paper. She found inconsistencies others missed. "This signature," she said one night, tapping a document, "is wrong. The curve here doesn't match the earlier ones." Elias stared at it, then at her. Slowly, a smile spread across his face, not amused, but proud. "You saved us months," he said. The final move came in autumn. Elias's brother, Thomas Cole, arrived at the valley gates with a small army of men and a warrant backed by corrupted officials. He rode at their head, dressed in dark wool, his resemblance to Elias unmistakable. Same eyes, same build, but where Elias carried stillness, Thomas radiated hunger. They met in the great hall. Thomas smiled when he saw Clara. "So this is the woman you hid for," he said, "pretty, simple." Clara met his gaze without fear. "So this is the man who mistook greed for strength." Thomas laughed. "You taught her well, brother, but words won't save you." Elias stepped forward, but Clara moved first. She laid documents on the table, records, proof, testimonies sealed months before, waiting for this moment, evidence of Thomas's crimes, his bribery, his attempted murder. "You came to claim what you thought was yours," Clara said evenly. "Instead, you delivered yourself." The officials shifted uneasily. Thomas's smile faltered. By nightfall, Thomas was escorted away in chains, not by Elias's men, but by the law he had once controlled. When silence returned to the valley, Elias found Clara standing by the waterfall where the path disappeared into stone. "You could have stayed silent," he said softly. "Let me fight." She turned to him. "Marriage is not silence," she said. "It is standing where the blow might fall." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if the mountain itself might try to take her away. Years later, when the mansion was no longer hidden by fear but by choice, Clara would walk its halls with confidence earned, not inherited. She would teach children in a sunlit room overlooking the valley. Elias would ride the mountains still but always return. And people would say the greatest fortune Elias Cole ever claimed was not carved from stone or signed in ink, but stood beside him, steady as the earth, when the world finally came calling.